Hey, I'm Down at Driveline, and today we're going to talk about youth hitting approach, and not necessarily more of a mechanical approach, but like how are we just going to coach kids when they're ready for competition in the box. What are some things that we can say that are going to help them, and what are some things that we could say that I'm pretty confident are going to hurt them? Let's not do that. Generally, when we start talking about kind of the way that most coaches talk to kids in the box, it kind of breaks down into like three different types of cues, right? Internal cues. By internal cues, what we mean are suggestions, coaching ideas, or areas of focus for the athlete that have to do with the internal configuration of their bodies. This is bad. We'll get back to that in a second. Situational review, right? Talking to an athlete about different approaches in terms of the count, different approaches in the game situation. This is kind of in the middle. And then kind of approach coaching, right? How do we try to push that athlete towards success? How do we give them some targets, some ideas to think about, or perhaps not think that's actually going to give them a higher probability of being able to solve kind of the biggest problem when it comes to hitting, which is the perceptual task of determining pitch speed, pitch movement, and pitch location. Because if we don't have any of those things, we could have an internal cue that's perfectly executed, or we could have a kid completely dialed on the situational reality of what he or she is facing, and if they're not on time, none of it matters. Internal cues, be very cautious. Without really beating the point completely into the ground, internal cues have a number of detrimental effects that have been observed in studies of actual higher level athletes. To kind of work down the list quickly, these type of internal cues, which again have to do with directing the athlete towards a configuration or placement in space of some sort of piece of their body, right? Very commonly on a Little League field, what have we all heard a bajillion times? Get that back elbow up, right? That type of stuff. That is an internal cue because you're asking an athlete to be cognizant of where this thing is located in space. In terms of the detrimental effects of internal cues, they've been shown to have an effect on the movement quality and reaction time of an athlete, and external cues are more effective when coaching movement. So internal cues, something that have to do with the athlete's configuration of their body. External cues, some sort of goal, process, or outcome-derived cue. Internal cues are also being shown to have a negative effect in terms of decreased balance, decreased power output, and decreased reaction time. Sounds like all of these things are probably the opposite of what we want when it comes to hitting. The other thing, and again, this is just as important as anything else in the equation, decreased adaptability to variability, right? We talk a lot about this idea that there's not necessarily one perfect swing that any athlete's going to execute, much less a youth athlete, but we need to give them kind of some swing principles where they can get a swing off on a good pitch in a variety of different locations and timing. Sometimes you're going to feel like a kid is going to do something funky in their box with their body, and it is your turn as the coach to jump in and try to solve it in that moment. My suggestion to you would be to understand that the way to kind of drive this athlete to a more beneficial mechanical configuration of their body is not when they're in the batter's box trying to hit a moving ball. Situational review, less terrible. Typically what we're trying to do is coaches have good intentions, but all they're doing is that they're bringing the athlete they're making them hyper aware of something that they're already aware of, right? The idea is that like little Timmy or little Jane knows that a base hit drives in a run because the runner that's on base got there just before they got into the batter's box. They know this, right? Reinforcing this idea and telling them something they already know, it's not necessarily hurting, but it's not helping either. Like, they know when you get to the point that we're actually talking to kids in the box, they're aware enough baseball-wise that they kind of understand the outcomes, right? They understand the point. So really continuing to harp on this type of stuff probably isn't helping. And the other thing is that kind of typically the underlying suggestion there, right, is that, hey, base hit scores us a run, making contact drives in a run. What you're kind of subtly doing a lot of the time is just suggesting to the athlete that, like, rather than hitting the ball hard, you just need to hit the ball, period. You're kind of like reducing the expectation level like right out of the gate. The problem with that is Schmidt and Sherwood, again, had a study that basically concluded that when performers are producing timing movements with nearly maximal output, somewhere around 84% of maximum, they are almost as accurate spatially, which is to say they were almost just as good at locating a barrel in space, as this is our baseball application, right, than when they had a drastic reduction of output. So if you consider kind of these two probabilities, right? If the athlete is similarly likely to be able to put a barrel on a ball, but the alternatives are either like 84% or better of maximal power output or 32% of maximum, it doesn't take a mathematician to understand that one of those strategies is very much preferable as opposed to the other. So again, our suggestion would just be to, like, if this is kind of the road you're going to go to in terms of situational review, let's make sure that that situational review is oriented in a direction where we're trying to encourage and incentivize the athlete to have high power output, right? Hit the ball hard. Caveat to this, what do we see in Little League very commonly? Pitcher gets in a plus count, anything where there are more strikes than there are balls, and you're going to get to that point in the game with, say, 11 and 12-year-olds where you're going to see that 0-2 Little League breaker, right? You're going to see that breaking pitch, either a curveball or a really bad circle change. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong once you start getting with athletes who are adept enough at kind of the primary movement to introduce this idea that, like, hey, look, know what you're going to look for, right? You go to a count and you're 0-0 and then you're 0-1. Let's say you miss 2 fastballs. Having that athlete understand, okay, I'm going to maybe expect that curveball to come from this kid because he's done it for literally every single, like the 4 or 5 batters previous. Understanding that, like, man, you can hang and bang, right? Allowing them kind of understand some tendencies that happen in the game. There's nothing necessarily wrong there. Of course, the fear is that you tell that kid, hey, look, it's going to be a constant 0-2 changeup, 0-2 curveball, and then what do you get is you get an 0-2 fastball and the kid gets blown away by it, right? But that is kind of the one caveat to that, right? It's just to give the kids some situational information and tendencies in terms of what they're already seeing, but also giving them the cognitive freedom to, like, hey, man, it's still on you. You still need to solve the primary problem.